What do you do when you run out of your parents' Easter dinner, sit in your car for 12 minutes, and can't bring yourself to drive away? My name is Ellie. I'm 32. I am a therapist. I specialize in family of origin trauma, the clinical phrase for what happens to you as an adult when the patterns of the family you grew up in continue to shape you in ways you didn't consciously choose and can't always see from inside. I help people map those patterns, name what was done to them, understand why, build lives that aren't organized around the original wound. I have been doing this work for 6 years. I have sat across from hundreds of people in the quiet of a therapy room and helped them understand the exact mechanics of what my family did to me on Easter Sunday. And I still ran. I want to start there, with that specific admission, because the version of this story that would be easier to tell is the one where professional knowledge protected me, where the training acted as armor, where knowing what a thing is made me immune to what it was. That version is cleaner and more satisfying, and it is not true. Knowing what a thing is and being safe from it are completely different categories of experience. My clients teach me this every week without intending to. I taught it to myself on a wet front lawn. My family is 5 people, plus the extended orbit that shows up for holidays. My parents, Patricia and Jerry, my older brother, Sean, my younger sister, Caitlin, my mother's sister, Carol, and her husband, my father's brother, Frank, and his wife, 3 children under 10 running between the legs of the adults. The house that holds all of this is the same house I grew up in, and it looks exactly the same as it did when I was 7, which is something I have thought about more than I want to admit. My family is not, on the surface, a family that looks like what it is. The families that look like what they are not the ones that take the longest to escape from. My mother, Patricia, everyone calls her Pat, is the kind of woman who makes casseroles for people in difficult times and remembers the names of everyone's children and sends birthday cards on the actual birthday. She is genuinely loved by the people around her. I want to be precise about that because the alternative, to say she is not capable of love, does not match what I know. She loves in the specific way of a woman who has never examined the difference between love and possession, and who has spent my entire life treating those two things as interchangeable. Growing up meant being the right kind of person. Not explicitly. It was never stated, never written down, never the subject of a direct conversation. It was communicated through the specific warmth that arrived when you were performing correctly, and the specific cooling when you weren't. Warmth when you had the results, attended the events, asked no difficult questions. Cooling when you pushed back, when something in you retreated into privacy instead of offering itself up to the room. I was the middle child and the peacekeeper. I read the room before anyone else in the room knew there was anything to read. I knew when my father was in a mood that required navigation. I knew when my mother had stored something she was going to deliver later. I was so good at managing that I became invisible in the specific way that people who manage other people's experience become invisible. You stop being a person in the room and become a function. I did not know for the first 28 years of my life that this was what I had been doing. I thought the exhaustion after every family gathering was a personality quirk. I thought the low-level anxiety that started on the drive to my parents' house was just the normal texture of caring deeply about people. I went to therapy at 28 because I was burning out at work, not because of my family. A colleague suggested that sometimes the walls you hit in client work are echoes of unresolved material in your own life. I had heard this said before in supervision, but it landed differently the week she said it to me. My therapist's name is June. In our 3rd session, she asked me to describe my role in my family of origin. I gave the standard framing. She said, "What did being the peacekeeper cost you?" I looked at her. She said it again and waited. I had never framed it as a cost before. It had always been just the thing I was, the arrangement of the family and my place in it. Costs implied something being taken. Over 4 years, what I found was not a dramatic revelation. No single hidden thing, no repressed memory. What I found was a pattern so consistent and so embedded in the ordinary texture of daily life that it had been indistinguishable from reality. My needs and feelings existed only insofar as they served the collective. When they fit, they were welcome. When they didn't, they were the problem. And I had spent 28 years adjusting myself to fit so automatically that the adjustment had stopped feeling like adjustment and started feeling like who I was. June gave me vocabulary I hadn't had: enmeshment, emotional parentification, the difference between being loved and being needed, the specific dynamic of a family system that treats individuation, the normal, healthy process of becoming a separate self, as abandonment. I had taught versions of these concepts to clients for years. Receiving them as descriptions of my own history was a different experience entirely. It is one thing to explain a concept. It is another to hear it and feel your entire childhood reorganize itself around the new understanding. 6 months before Easter, I had a conversation with my mother I had been preparing for in therapy for weeks. She had a long-standing habit of giving me advice on my life I hadn't asked for. This sounds mundane as I write it. The thing people say about their mothers as a half-affectionate complaint, the kind that gets laughs at a dinner party. In practice, it had a different weight. The advice wasn't occasional. It was the framework of every relationship we had, my friendships, my career, and whether private practice was really sustainable, my appearance, my eating, my sleep, my social life, who I spent time with, and whether those people were good for me. My mother did not experience this as criticism. In her framework, this attention was love. This was what it meant to be invested. In June's framework, and increasingly in my own, it was a system of surveillance dressed in the language of care. In a Sunday phone call, I said something I had never said before in that specific way. Mom, when I share things about my life with you, can you try to just listen rather than tell me what to do about them? I don't need advice. I just want to be able to talk to you. She said she hadn't realized she'd been doing anything wrong. She said she would try. The phone call ended with the quality of something interrupted rather than finished. Over the following weeks, the advice continued. Sometimes more cautiously, sometimes exactly as before. What it produced was a slight shift in temperature, something cooler, more careful, that I recognized as the family system's response to deviation from expected behavior. I am a therapist. I recognize this pattern completely. I watched it happen in real time and had all the vocabulary for it, and it still hurt, which is the lesson I keep arriving back at then Christmas. I didn't go. I had never, as an adult, spent Christmas anywhere but my parents' house. In a session in early December, June asked what I wanted to do about Christmas. I said I wanted to go because not going would cause too much difficulty. She asked me to notice that the question I'd answered was different from the question she'd asked. I spent 2 weeks sitting with what I actually wanted, and what I wanted was not to go. I called my mother and said I wasn't coming, that I was finding family gatherings draining and I needed a break. She cried. Then she managed the crying, which was its own kind of communication. She listed everything I would miss. The people, the gatherings, my grandmother getting older, all of it true, all of it delivered in the voice she used when listing true things as a way of not saying the thing she was actually feeling. Christmas I spent at my best friend Roshin's house, with her partner and 2 friends, eating too much and watching films that had nothing to do with Christmas. I sat on her sofa with my feet under a blanket and felt something I could only describe as spacious, like a room I'd never been in that had always been available. In the 4 months between Christmas and Easter, I heard versions of the story through the family's channels. Sean said Mom was struggling to understand what was going on with me. Caitlin texted that she missed me. My Aunt Carol sent a message about how family was so important, especially as we got older. I decided to go to Easter, not naively. In the Thursday session before, June asked what I was hoping for. I said I wasn't hoping for transformation, not expecting the conversation we needed to happen at a holiday dinner with 20 people in the house. I thought going was a way of showing up without my absence becoming the story. June asked, "What's your exit plan?" I sat with that on the drive there, and in the car outside the house for 5 minutes before I went in. The first hour was fine. My mother hugged me and it was warm and genuine. I spent 20 minutes with my grandmother in her armchair. I had a glass of wine and talked to Caitlin about a trip she was planning. When Sean and I had a conversation about something at work, I thought, maybe the Christmas distance produced enough space for things to be different. I noted that I was thinking this. I had been trained to notice exactly this kind of thinking. The softening, the hoping, the adjustment of perception toward what we want to be true. I held it loosely. At 2:15, we sat for the meal. My Uncle Frank asked what was new with me. I said work was good, 2 new clients in January, the practice developing well. He said, good. Your mother says you've been going through something. My mother said from the other end of the table. She's been seeing a therapist, which is great, of course. We just haven't seen much of her since she started. The table recalibrated. My Aunt Carol said therapy must help if you find the right person. My mother said she'd missed me at Christmas. She said it to the room rather than to me. A statement of fact distributed as information for everyone, which made it harder to address than if she'd directed it at me. Sean said, not unkindly, "What's actually going on, Elle? Because I feel like something's been happening for months and nobody's really talking about it." I said I'd been doing a lot of work on myself in therapy, which meant making some changes to how I spent my time and energy. My mother asked what kind of changes. I said I'd asked her to change how she gave advice on our calls, that I'd needed some space after Christmas. She said, "I didn't realize asking about your life was a problem." I said it wasn't about asking, it was about the advice. My Aunt Carol said Pat was just trying to be involved. That's love. My Uncle Frank said therapists can fill your head with ideas about your family that don't always match reality. I told him I was a therapist. He said, right. But you know what he meant when it's your own family. My mother said the hard thing was feeling like something had changed in me, and she didn't know what it was, and I hadn't given them the chance to understand it. My brother said I had kind of pulled away from everyone. Caitlin said she'd felt it too. I looked around the table. My father was quiet, the specific silence of a man watching something happen and not yet having decided whether to enter it. My grandmother had found something to look at outside the window. Then my mother said, searching for the word, "You used to be so open. You used to come home and it was easy. You used to talk to me." Then, "I don't recognize my daughter anymore." The table was quiet. I know, professionally, precisely what this sentence is and what it does. I have heard it from clients, describing what their parents said when they began to change, when they stopped performing the function. I know this sentence is not a description of the person who has changed. It is a description of the system losing its hold on them. The version of me my mother recognized was the version managed and contained and organized around the family's needs for 32 years. The version she didn't recognize was the first version entirely. Mine. I know all of this. I also know that hearing your mother say she doesn't recognize you at a table with your whole family is not something professional knowledge metabolizes in real time. You might. Chair made a sound on the floor. I was already standing before I was aware of having decided to stand. I said, and I remember this clearly because it is one of the things I have been grateful for since. I said, "I love all of you. I'm going to go home." I picked up my bag from the back of the chair. My mother said my name. I said I'd call her in a few days. I walked down the hallway, through the front door, across the wet lawn, and I got in my car. 12 minutes. I know it was 12 minutes because I watched the clock on the dashboard in the way you watch a clock when watching is the only action available. My phone lit up on the seat. My mother, then Caitlin, then my Aunt Carol's number. I let them all go. I called Roisin when I could speak without my voice doing the thing I didn't want it to do. She answered and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Where are you?" I told her. She said she'd stay on the phone. She stayed on the phone for the full drive home and a while after. June, that Thursday, said, "What does it feel like from the inside?" I said like the beginning of something. Not the middle, not the end. The beginning. She said that was appropriate. That was actually what it was. 4 months on, from my apartment on a Saturday morning with coffee and the specific quiet of a day that belongs entirely to me. My practice is full. I took on 2 new clients last month, both of them navigating exactly the family material I know most intimately. I sit across from them on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoons and hear what they say with everything I have. Not just the training, not just the clinical framework, but the specific gravity of someone who has been where they are and knows what it costs. My relationship with my mother is a project, not fixed. Better weeks and worse ones. She has started saying occasionally, "Tell me what's going on for you," instead of the advice. Not every time, but sometimes I give those moments the weight they deserve without building a complete new structure on them. She is learning. I am learning. The learning is slower and less linear than I hoped and more real than any alternative would be. Sean and I have become something we weren't before. Actually close. Not through managing family dynamics, but through real conversation between 2 people who grew up in the same house and are only now telling each other the truth about what that was like. He said last month, "I think you were the one who kept us all functional for so long that none of us learned how to do it ourselves." He said it with guilt directed inward. I told him I didn't want him to carry that. He said he'd think about it. My grandmother at 91 holds my hand very deliberately when I visit. She said once, "You always carried too much for them." I watched you. You always made sure everyone was all right before you were all right. Yourself. She said it with the directness of someone who has been watching for decades and has decided at 91 that there is no further benefit to indirection. I held her hand for a long time after. I think about the running differently now than I did in the first weeks. In those first weeks, I kept looking for the version where it was a mistake, where the training should have produced a different outcome, where the better version of me would have managed the afternoon to a different end. I kept looking for that version and it kept not appearing. What I found instead, through the therapy and the months and quiet Saturday mornings, was something closer to the truth of it. The running was not a failure of management. It was the end of it. The moment when the part of me that had been managing for 32 years stepped back, and the part that had been building for 4 years stepped forward. That part doesn't manage. That part moves when she needs to move. She picks up her bag. She says she loves them. She crosses the wet lawn in her Easter clothes and gets in her car and gives herself 12 minutes to be still before she starts the engine. She is not as comfortable as the managed version. She does not smooth as well or absorb as much or fit as neatly into the space the room has allocated for her. She is 32 years old and still learning her own edges, but she is the version that runs when she needs to. The version that calls Roisin and tells the truth. The version that sits in the car for 12 minutes instead of going back inside. My mother said she didn't recognize me. She was right. She recognized the version I had been building for her. She did not recognize the version I am building for myself. I am building her slowly, the way you build things that need to last. She is made out of 4 years of Thursday afternoons and 12 minutes in a car, and one phone call to Roisin and the specific quiet of Saturday mornings. She is made out of everything I know professionally about family, systems, and everything I have learned personally about what it costs when the system is your own, and the knowledge isn't the same as safety. She is the version that knows the difference. She's the one writing this.